J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Ms. Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. Family of Mrs. Betty Jean Charles Miller of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mr. Willie Lee Hawkins of Americus, Georgia. The family of Ms. Lydia Pearl Toots Wilson of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Alicia Bernadette Telfair Williams of Cordele, Georgia. Would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mrs. Betty Jean Charles Miller, age 78, of 1229 Railroad Avenue, Rochelle, Georgia, died Wednesday, September 6 at her residence in Rochelle, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Betty Jean Charles Miller, age 78, was held Sunday, September 10, in the sanctuary of the Piney Grove Baptist Church in Rochelle, Georgia. The pastor, Reverend Travis Johnson, officiated. The burial followed at the Piney Grove Cemetery in Rochelle, Georgia. Survivors include 4 loving and devoted daughters, Ms. Shanika Miller Coley and her husband, Mr. Torrey Coley, Mrs. Donna Moore and her husband, Mr. Willie Moore Sr., Mrs. Willa Thompson and her husband, Mr. John Thompson, and Ms. Gladys Grace and her husband, Mr. Bobby Grace Sr. 4 beloved sons, Mr. Willie Frank Miller and his wife, Mrs. Simone Miller, Mr. Jackie Miller and his wife, Mrs. Linda Faye Miller, Mr. Quincy Miller, and Mr. Darius Miller and his wife, Mrs. Natalie Miller. 25 beloved grandchildren, to include 5 special grands she raised, Ms. Wendy Childs, Ms. Lisa Youngblood, Mr. Darian Miller, Ms. Demisha Miller, and Ms. Shaquisha Coley. 44 beloved great-grandchildren, 1 great-great-grandchild, her beloved sisters, her twin, Miss Barbara Benjamin and Mrs. Faye Holmes and our husband, Mr. Willie Holmes. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Eddie Childs and Mr. Johnny B. Childs. 2 additional bonus children, Ivory Jean Childs and Isaiah Childs. 2 special cousins, Miss Queenie Mae Ferguson and Mrs. Friendly Miller. A host of nieces and nephews, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends, to include her special friends, Miss Gloria Hunt, Miss Regina Lawson, Miss Bertha McAdoo, and Miss Dorothy Emery. Survived Mrs. Betty Jean Childs Miller, age 78, of 1229 Railroad Avenue, Rochelle, Georgia. Mr. Willie Lee Hawkins, age 57, of 476 Lamar Road, Americus, Georgia, died Monday, September 4th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Willie Hawkins, age 57, was held Wednesday, September 13th, in the sanctuary of the Friendship Baptist Church in Americus, Georgia. The pastor, Bishop Melvin McCluster, officiated. The eulogy was delivered by his pastor, the Reverend Cecil Strawder, pastor of the Gethsemane Baptist Church. The burial followed at the Spring Creek Church Cemetery in Cobb, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Miss Kiana Young of Warner Robins, Georgia, Mr. Jarrett Hawkins of Dallas, Texas, Mr. Jerkey Smith of Americus, Georgia, a beloved grandson, Master Damanian Young of Warner Robins, Georgia, his loving and devoted mother, Mother Melan Holt Hawkins of Americus, Georgia, his loving and caring sibling, Deacon Johnny Hawkins Jr., his wife, Mrs. Nancy Hawkins, Mr. Buster Hawkins, Mr. Solomon Holt, and his wife, Mrs. Jeanette Holt, Deacon Robert Hawkins and his wife, Mrs. Jacqueline Hawkins, Miss Frankie Cross, and Miss Annie Griffin, all of Americus, Georgia, Mrs. Lizzie Spencer, and her husband, Mr. Willie Spencer, Macon, Georgia, Deacon Willie Hawkins and his wife, Mrs. Carolyn Hawkins, and Mrs. Isella Hawkins, Mr. Isella Hawkins and his wife, Mrs. T. Hawkins of Vienna, Georgia, Mr. Leon Hawkins of Warner Robins, Georgia, a beloved aunt, Mrs. Bertha Mae Floyd of Americus, Georgia, a host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survived Mr. Willie Lee Hawkins, age 57, of 476 Lamar Road, Americus, Georgia. Mrs. Lydia Pearl Toots Wilson, age 90, of 811 East Pine Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Monday, September 4th, at her residence in Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Lydia Pearl Toots Wilson, age 90, was held Saturday, September 16th, in the chapel of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Dr. Thaddeus Lakeler officiated. The burial followed at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Alonzo Cole and his wife, Mrs. Sandy Cole of Aberdeen, Washington, Mrs. Kathy Bolton and her husband, Mr. Derek Bolton, Mr. Timothy Rembrandt and his wife, Mrs. Margaret Rembrandt, both Vienna, Georgia, and Mrs. Mona Evans and her husband, Mr. Tony Evans of Smyrna, Tennessee. A beloved stepdaughter, Miss Vanessa Peters of Houston, Texas, 21 beloved grandchildren, 27 great-grandchildren. Her loving sister, Miss Vicki Lynn Tate of Boston, Massachusetts. A beloved daughter-in-law, Miss Rena Clay Williams of Las Vegas, Nevada. A host of nieces and nephews to include Mr. Andre Toots of Boynton Beach, Florida. A host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive, to include a dear friend, Miss Patricia Gillard of Flint, Michigan, survived. Miss Lydia Pearl Toots Wilson, age 90, of 811 East Pine Street, Vienna, Georgia. Mrs. Elisa Bernadetta Telfair Williams, age 67, of 2106 South 7th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, September 7th at her residence in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Elisa Bernadette Telfair Williams, age 67, was held Saturday, September 16, in the sanctuary of the Church of Christ at Hilltop in Cordele, Georgia. The pastor, Brother James Leon Hughes, officiated. The burial followed at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Brother Herman Williams of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving and devoted children, Mr. Jeffrey Walker and his wife, Mrs. Natasha Walker, and Mrs. Leanne Simmons and her husband, Mr. Roderick Simmons of Cordele, Georgia. Ms. Chandra Jones and her husband, Mr. Carlos Jones of Columbus, Georgia. 7 loving grandchildren, her beloved sister, Miss Vivian Telfair of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Sarah Saints and her husband, Roosevelt Saints of Green Cold Spring, Florida. Her beloved uncle, retired Fire Chief Augusta Telfair of Cordele, Georgia, and Mr. Willie B. Melvin of Crestview, Florida. Her mother-in-law, Miss Lena Rose, her brothers-in-law, Mr. Richard Williams and Mr. David Corbin, and his wife, Mrs. Diane Corbin of Adel, Georgia, and Mr. Henry Corbin of Cordele, Georgia. A host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survived. Mrs. Elisa Bernadette Telfair Williams, age 67, of 2106 South 7th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Again, the family of Mrs. Betty Jean Charles Miller of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mr. Willie Lee Hawkins of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Lydia Pearl Toots Wilson of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Elisa Bernadette Telfair Williams of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mr. Charlie Lee Shine, Jr., age 72, of 5050 U.S. Highway 41 North, Ashburn, Georgia, died Friday, September 15th, at his residence in Ashburn, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted son, Mr. Randall Shine of Ashburn, Georgia, 2 grandchildren, his loving sisters, Miss Helen Shine of Tifton, Georgia, and Miss Vicky Shine of Ashburn, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Charlie Lee Shine Jr., age 72, of 5050 U.S. Highway 41 North, Ashburn, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Charlie Lee Shine Jr., age 72, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Leslie Lewis Green, age 76, of 511 East 18th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, September 16, at the home of her beloved son, Mr. Andrew Green, in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her beloved and caring son, Mr. Andrew Green of Cordele, Georgia, a beloved stepdaughter, Miss Brenda Allen of Cordele, Georgia, 4 beloved grandchildren, 6 great-grandchildren, her loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Mary Jean Atkins and her husband, Deacon Charlie Atkins, Miss Janet Lewis Johnson of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Janice Grimstead of Dayton, Ohio. Her beloved brothers, Deacon Eddie Charles Lewis and his wife, Mrs. Wilma Lewis, Mr. Bobby Lewis, Mr. Calvin Lewis, Mr. Tommy Lee Lewis and his wife, Mrs. Donna Lewis of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved aunts and uncles, Mr. Willie James Johnson, Mr. Roosevelt Smith, Mrs. Bernice Hessel, all of Cordele, Georgia. Minister Moore Merritt of Vienna, Georgia. Mrs. Annie Lee Roundtree of Belglade, Florida. Ms. Mary Sanders of Clearwater, Florida. And Ms. Ella Mae Porter of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her in-laws, Ms. Sonia Green, Ms. Cheryl J. Smith, and her husband, Mr. James Smith of Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Ruth G. Kears and her husband, Mr. J.D. Kears of Cocoa, Florida, and Mr. Rodney Green of Florida. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Leslie Lewis Green, age 76, of 511 East 18th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Leslie Lewis Green, age 76, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Dalvin Newman, age 31, of 209 Crest Drive, Warner Robins, Georgia, died Saturday, September 16, in Houston County. Survivors include his beloved daughter, Miss Janice Newman, his loving and devoted mother, Mrs. Valerie Lumpkin Toombs of Warner Robins, Georgia, his beloved stepfather, Mr. Flex Wynn, his beloved sister, Miss Santrion Adams, and Miss Kalita Lumpkin, a host of other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Dalvin Newman, age 31, of 209 Crescent Drive, Warner Robins, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Dalvin Newman, age 31, of 209 Crescent Drive, Warner Robins, Georgia, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mr. Anthony Perry King Sr., age 59, of 214 East 15th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Valeria King, his loving and devoted children, Mrs. Shalanta Henderson and her husband, Mr. Kelton Henderson, Mr. Ravis Spivey and his wife, Miss Kimberly Spivey, Mr. Keytravius Spivey and his wife, Mrs. Brella Spivey, all of Warner Robins, Georgia, Miss Nigel Fullwood of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Marcus Spivey and his wife, Miss Misha Spivey of Texas, Mr. Corey Spivey, Miss Shabrika King, Miss Amelia Peterson, Mr. Preston Peterson and his wife, Mrs. Second Peterson, and Mrs. Elaine Mays and her husband, Mr. Elijah Mays of Cordele, Georgia. His loving and devoted mother, Mrs. Betty Sue Rogers, his beloved brother, Mr. Bernard King of Atlanta, Georgia, his uncles, Mr. James Woodson and his wife, Miss Liz Woodson, Mr. John Lee King, all of Florida, his beloved aunt, Miss Ellen Applin, Miss Patricia King, Mrs. Dolores Barner, and her husband, Mr. Wayne Barner, all of Cordele, Georgia, a host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Anthony Perry King Sr., age 59, of 214 East 15th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Anthony Perry King Sr., age 59, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind each of you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, and also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
And now for announcements. The Shady Grove CME Church annual camp meeting will be held today, Sunday, September 17th, with Sunday school beginning at 10 o'clock a.m., worship service at 11 a.m. The afternoon service will begin at 1:30 p.m. with the Piney Grove Baptist Church and Macedonia Baptist Churches in charge of the service. Reverend Jesse Watts will deliver the sermon. Brother Peyton Bill, chairman of stewards. Reverend Andrew Thomas is the pastor. The Spring Hill Baptist Church of Tippettville annual Deacons Fellowship anniversary will be today, Sunday, September 17th at 11 o'clock a.m. Masks are optional. Social distancing is desired. Dinner will be served. Sister Mary Ann Lewis, Secretary. Deacon Calvin Youngblood, Chairman of Deacons. Reverend Choice Cobb Sr. is the pastor. The Big Poplar Spring Baptist Church of Unadilla, Georgia, 144th church anniversary will be Sunday, September 24th at 11 a.m. Greater New Hope Baptist Church and Reverend E.J. Elliott will be in charge of the service. Dinner will be served. Minister Rashonda Williams, Church Secretary. Deacon Wilbert Whitehead Jr., Chairman of Deacons. Reverend Lucius Albritton Jr. is the pastor. The St. John Baptist Church of Leslie, Georgia extends an invitation for each of you to worship with them during the annual homecoming celebration today, Sunday, September 17. Sunday school begins at 9 o'clock a.m. and worship service at 10 o'clock a.m. Pastor Jameson Hatley of Albany, Georgia will bring the message. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Dinner will be served. Reverend Calvin James is the pastor. You're invited to worship at the Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church today. Sunday school at 9 o'clock a.m., worship service at 9:30 a.m. You may join them on Tuesday, midday prayer conference at 12 o'clock noon, Thursday prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 o'clock p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. Mother Mary Henderson, Church Mother, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Chairman of Deacons, Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church conference call scheduled Sunday morning at 10 a.m., prayer Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 o'clock noon. Bible study is held each Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. The call-in number is 339-209-6419. Deacon Joe Wedges, Chairman of Deacons, Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship with the Gethsemane Baptist Church in celebration of its church and pastor's anniversary today. Worship service begins at 10:30 a.m. Mother Mary S. Butler, Church Mother, Deacon Johnny Wilson, Chairman of Deacons, Reverend Cecil Straughter is the pastor. The Spring Hill Baptist Church of Cordele annual revival will begin on Wednesday, September 20th through Thursday, September 21st at 7 p.m. each evening. Our program will be Wednesday, Pastor Samuel Stokes, Thursday, Pastor Donnie R. Hall. Mother Lily Mathis is the church mother. Deacon Eddie Byron is Chairman of Deacons. Pastor Shannon Solette is the pastor. The Beulah Land Baptist Church male choir 11th anniversary will be on Sunday, September 24th at 2 o'clock p.m. Everyone is invited to attend. Deacon Jesse Quarterman, male choir president. Deacon Willie Smith, chairman of deacons. Dr. Dwayne Daniels is the pastor. The Bethesda Baptist Church of Americas is seeking a full-time pastor. For more information and application, please call 229-591-2542. 229-591-2542. The New Corinth Baptist Church of Leslie, Georgia invites everyone to worship with them this morning, beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Reverend Carl Smith is the pastor. The McAfee Grove Baptist Church of Leesburg invites everyone to worship with them. Family nights Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m. Small class study Thursdays at 7 p.m. Sunday morning worship at 9 a.m. You may join them by calling 425-436-6341. The access code is 708058. Dr. Robert L. Morgan Sr. is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship at the St. King Baptist Church during their worship service, which begins at 10:15 a.m. Reverend Woody Burnham is the pastor. The New Oakville Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them each Sunday for Sunday school at 9:15 a.m. Worship service at 10 o'clock a.m. Face covering is required. Deacon Alonzo Jones is the chairman of deacons. Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The Beautiful Zion Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them today during its 11 a.m. worship service. Mother Grace Patrick, church mother, Reverend Lorinda Ray is the pastor. The Greater Gum Creek Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them each first, second, third, and fourth Sundays beginning at 10:30 a.m. Mother Norma Solomon, church mother, Deacon Lonnie Hagerbrook, chairman of deacons, Reverend Joseph Hagerbrook is the pastor. The Zion Hope Baptist Church extends a cordial invitation for everyone to worship with them during this worship service each second Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Mother Leela Smith, church mother, Deacon Xavier Bryan is chairman of deacons, Reverend Willie James Felton is the pastor. You're cordially invited to worship at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today. Sunday school begins at 9:45 a.m. During the morning worship service this morning at 10:30 a.m., the annual Mission Day program will be observed. Sister Rosalind Berryhill Gatson of Americas, Georgia will be the guest speaker. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Deacon Leon Spears, chairman of deacons, Reverend Isaac H. Owens is the pastor. As always, at this time, we would like to remind you again concerning our J.W. Williams Funeral Home YouTube channel. You may join us live each Sunday morning at 7 o'clock a.m. on our J.W. Williams Funeral Home YouTube channel for our Sunday morning program. Please do that each Sunday morning at 7 a.m. That concludes our announcements for this morning.
Dedication requested by her beloved husband, her children, her beloved mother and grandmother, and the entire Sharp, Lively, and Talbert family. In loving memory of Mrs. Jessica Sharp Lively, who departed this life September 12, 2021, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Deacon R.C. Henderson Sr., who departed this life September 16, 2020. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mother Mary Henderson, all of the children, grandchildren, and the entire family. Gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Deacon Barney Williams, who departed this life September. Dedication requested by the Harris and Williams family. Gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Willie Jr. Davis, who departed this life September 18, 1990. Dedication requested by Mrs. Mary Frances Davis. Gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Estella Biles, who would have celebrated her birthday September 19th. Dedication requested by Mr. Dewey and Mr. Robert Jones and her beloved sister, Mrs. Dorothy Rose Jones, and the entire family. Gone but not forgotten. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following. Happy anniversary to Mr. Frankie and Miss Deborah Collier, who celebrated their anniversary Monday, September 11th. Dedication requested by their children and grandchildren. God bless your union and keep it strong. Happy anniversary to Mr. Travis and Mrs. DJ Taylor, who celebrated their anniversary Monday, September 11th. Anniversary requested by the Collier family. God continue to bless your union and keep it strong. Special anniversary wishes goes out. Happy 50th wedding anniversary to Brother James L. Hughes and Sister Yvonne Hughes, who celebrated their anniversary. Dedication requested by the entire Hughes and Montfrey family, as well as the members of the Church of Christ at Hilltop. Our friend and brother, Brother James L. Hughes and Sister Yvonne Hughes celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. God continue to bless your union and keep it strong. Happy 35th anniversary to Mr. James and Mrs. Kathy Chambliss, who celebrated their anniversary Saturday, September 16th. Dedication requested by the Chambliss and Kears family. Happy 35th wedding anniversary to Mr. Jamie and Mrs. Kathy Chambliss, who celebrated their anniversary Saturday, September 16th. God bless your union and keep it strong. Happy 27th anniversary to the Reverend Donnie R. Hall and Sister Amanda Hall, who celebrated their anniversary on September the 14th. Happy 27th anniversary to the Reverend Donnie and Sister Amanda Hall. God bless your union and keep it strong. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following. Happy birthday to Mr. Philip Stembridge, who celebrated his birthday Sunday, September 10th. Dedication requested by his beloved mother, Mrs. Annette Stembridge, and the entire family. Happy birthday to Mr. Marquise Field, better known as Tree Man, who celebrated his birthday Sunday, September 10th. Dedication requested by the Collier family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Melva Haddad West, who celebrated her birthday Thursday, September 14th. Dedication requested by Deacon Kenneth and Sister Shanita Grace. Happy birthday to Mr. Freeman Grace Jr., who celebrated his birthday Thursday, September 14th. Dedication requested by Deacon Kenneth Grace and Sister Shanita Grace. Happy birthday to Mr. Tyshawn Felton, who celebrated his birthday Friday, September 13th. Dedication requested by the Felton family. Special birthday wishes goes out to Deacon Ricky Dawson Jr., County Coroner, who celebrated his birthday Saturday, September 16th. Dedication requested by his beloved mother, Miss Rosalind Porter, and the entire family. Happy birthday to Deacon Ricky Dawson Jr., Chris County Coroner, celebrating his birthday Saturday, September 16th. Happy birthday to Mr. Vantavius Williams, my nephew, celebrated his birthday Saturday, September 16th. Dedication requested by his mother, Miss Shonda Jackson, and the entire family. Special birthday wishes goes out to Mother Melan Hawkins, who is celebrating her birthday today, September 17th. Dedication requested by all of her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the entire Hawkins family. Happy birthday to Mother Melan Hawkins, who's celebrating her birthday today. God bless you and many, many more. Special birthday wishes goes out to my cousin, Mrs. Louise Parker Royal, who celebrated her birthday on September 6th. Dedication requested by the entire Royal family. Special birthday wishes goes out to my cousin, Mrs. Louise Parker Royal, celebrated her birthday on September the 6th. Happy birthday to little Poppy Muhammad, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, September 18th. Dedication requested by her grandparents, Deacon Kenneth and Sister Shanita Grace. Happy birthday to Mrs. Martha Lester Harris of Durham, North Carolina, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, September 18th. Dedication requested by the Lester and Harris family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Juanita Mathis Talbert, who will celebrate her birthday Tuesday, September 19th. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, her brothers, and the entire Talbert and Mathis family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Juanita Mathis Talbot, who will celebrate her birthday Tuesday, September 19th. Special birthday wishes come from her pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, and the members of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, her beloved Junior Usher Board, and the entire membership. Happy birthday to Mrs. Brenda Napa Cross, who will celebrate her birthday Tuesday, September 19th. Dedication requested by our beloved husband, Mr. Richard Cross, the entire Cross and Napa family. Mrs. Brenda Napa Cross. Happy birthday to Mrs. Melissa Lester Jones of McDonald, Georgia, who will celebrate her birthday Tuesday, September 19th. Dedication requested by the Lester and Jones family. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: Deacon James Smith and family, Deacon Henry King of the Gethsemane Baptist Church and church mother, Mother Mary Butler, Mr. A.J. and Ms. Vera Rivers and family, Cordell City Commissioner, Mrs. Vesta Shepherd, the entire Shepherd and Bill family, Miss Mary Bill and family, Mrs. Willie Mae Crapp and family, Deacon Willie Smith and family, Mother Grace Patrick and family, Mrs. Essie Gay and family, Miss Gwendolyn Henderson and family, Miss Eddie Ruth White and family, Mother Leela Smith of the Zion Hope Baptist Church of Winona, Georgia, church mother, Mother Adeline Lofton and family, Mother Martha Westbrook and family, Mrs. Willie Mae Leary and family of Hatley, Georgia, Miss Martha Clay and family, Deacon and Mrs. John Eddie Wiggins and family, Mother Willie McGill and family, Miss Geraldine Johnson and family, Deacon William and Sister Robin Durham and family of Albany and Cordele, Georgia, Mr. and Mrs. Sammy Hill and family, Mr. and Mrs. Paul Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Ernest Reese and family, Deacon Eddie Porter and family, Sister Gladys Porter and family, Mrs. Denise Denard and family, Mr. and Mrs. Melvin Jones and family, Mr. Lonnie Walker and family, Mrs. Carolyn Jackson and family, Pastor and Elder Billy Sanford and family, Deacon and Mrs. Alfred Hagenbrook and family, the Foster family, the Gamble family, Mr. and Mrs. Buford Royal Jr. and family, Miss Dora Taylor and family, Mr. Alvin Short and family, Miss Tawana Leonard and family, Mrs. Jacqueline Leonard and family, Mr. Robert Lee McLeod and family, Mr. Charles McLeod and family, Miss Nettie Bush and family, Mr. and Mrs. Alvin Beal and family, Deaconess Connie James and family, Mrs. Minnie Fletcher and family, Mother Ruby Felton and family, Mrs. Charlie Butts and family, Miss Linda Asker and family, Miss Janice Montford and family, Miss Dorothy King, a mother and daughter, Miss Fanny Royal and family, Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Ford and family, Mrs. Johnny Campbell and family, the Spears family of Cordele and Turner County, Mrs. Aletha Askew, church clerk and trustee of the New Oak Grove Baptist Church, the Reverend and Mrs. Dion Jones and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Charles Perry Jr. and family, Deacon and Mrs. Rodney Teal and family, Dr. and Mrs. Henry Young and family, Miss Betty Roberson and family, Mrs. Ida Ruth Bryan and family, Mr. and Mrs. Jerome Outlaw and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Willie E. Lockett and family, Mr. and Mrs. Jerry Lester and family, the King family, Deacon Michael Holden family, Miss Vivian Telfair and family, Mr. and Mrs. Lucius Bagley and family, Mrs. Glish Parham and family, Miss Cynthia White and family, Miss Irma Tyson and family, Judge Gail Sims and family, Mr. Ernest Kears and family, Mrs. Betty Dotson and family, Miss Sarah Henderson and family, Mr. Terrell Wilson and family, Mr. Herman Neely and family of Ashburn, Georgia, Miss Sandra Jackson and family, Dr. Eutha D. Dydale and family, Miss Mary Kitchen and family, Mrs. Betty Wallace and family, Miss Serena Williams and family, Miss Marion Street and family, Mrs. Curtis Ezel and the staff of BJ's Diner and the entire Ezel and Felton family. Miss Ruby Jones and family, Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt Williams and family, Mr. and Mrs. Mr. Anthony West and family, Mrs. Willie Ruth Jones and family, Deacon and Mrs. Greg Frederick and family, Mrs. Isaiah Carter and family, Mr. Benny Hamilton and family, Mrs. Dan Colson and family, Deacon and Mrs. Willie Colson Jr. and family, Miss Valerie Roy and family, Miss Geraldine Perry and family, Dr. Ruby Jackson and family, the Grover Mathis family of Turner County, Mrs. Juanita Lewis and family, Mr. Michael Lane and family, Mrs. Mother Mamie Robinson and family, Deacon Kelvin and Mrs. Rosemary Jones and family, Mr. and Mrs. Governor Arner and family, Deacon and Mrs. Garrett Parham and family, Deacon and Mrs. Frank Brown and family, Miss Johnny Bell and family, Miss Dicey Relaford and family, Mother Mary Hall and family, and the entire Hall and Fish family, Miss Bessie Slade and family, Mrs. Regina Bryan and family, Miss Brenda Dent and family, Mrs. Corinda Hicks and family, Our first selection this morning goes out to Mr. Simon Felder and family, Ms. Jenny Mae Sanders and family, the Reverend, and Mrs. Keith Lewis and family, Mr. and Mrs. George Reichert and family, Mrs. Joe Black and the entire Black family of Vienna, Georgia, Miss Pamela Law and family, Mr. Harvey C. and family, Mrs. Blighty Bill and family, Miss Mattie West and family, Mr. and Mrs. John Leroy Perry and family, the Cantrell family, the Hardrick family, Miss Marion Felton and family, Mrs. Bobby Jean Vandrew and family, Mrs. Christine Kingdom and family, Deacon George Jordan and family, Vienna, Georgia, Deacon Jerome Jordan and family, Mrs. Pernell, Mr. and Mrs. Pernell Lakeler and family, Dr. and Mrs. Thaddeus Lakeler and family, Ms. Dorothy Lamar and family, Deacon Willie C. Kendrick and family, the Clee Hollowbrook family, Mrs. Priscilla Woodson and family, Ms. Rosa Cooper and family, Ms. Lily Mae Perry and family, the Mike Hamilton family of Lily, Georgia, Mr. and Mrs. Emerson London and family, Deacon and Mrs. Johnny Perry and family of Vienna, Georgia, Mother Mary Benjamin and family, the Granville family, Mr. Arthur Lawson and family, Mrs. Calvin Baskin Jr. and family, Mr. Frank Thomas and family, Ms. Molly Williams and family, Mrs. Shirley Jean Taylor and family, Ms. Evelyn Thomas and family, Mrs. G. Lundy and family, Mrs. Eunice Lewis and family, Miss Claudia Mae Dawson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Arman and family, Mrs. Mrs. Randall Lango and family, Mrs. Minnie Jewel Duhart and family, Mr. and Mrs. Wayne Anderson and family, Mrs. Natalie Burks and family, Mr. Tommy Rogers and family, Mr. and Mrs. Willie Lee Taylor Sr. and family, the Crosby family, Deacon Chester Mike Williams Jr. and family, Mrs. Maddie Mae King and family, Deacon Mrs. Bruce Kendrick and family, Mr. Roger Duhart and family, Ms. Doris Duhart and family, Ms. Nora Lee Adams and family. Our first selection this morning goes out to the mayor of Vienna, Georgia, and the entire Daniels family. Our first selection this morning. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Mr. Charlie Lee Shine, Jr., age 72, of 5050 U.S. Highway 41 North, Ashburn, Georgia, died Friday, September 15, at his residence in Ashburn, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Charlie Lee Shine, Jr., age 72, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangement. Mrs. Leslie Lewis Green, age 76, of 511 East 18th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, September 16th, at the home of a beloved son, Mr. Andrew Green in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Ms. Leslie Lewis Green will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangement. Mr. Dalvin Newman, age 31, of 209 Crescent Drive, Warner Robins, Georgia, died Saturday, September 16th in Warner Robins, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Dalvin Newman, age 31, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangement. Mr. Anthony Perry King Sr., age 59, of 214 East 15th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, March 16th, of injuries sustained in a house fire. The funeral service for Mr. Anthony Perry King Sr., age 59, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Diana are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our next and final selection for this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family, Mrs. Betty Jean Charles Miller of Rochelle, Georgia. The family, Mr. Willie Lee Hawkins of Americus, Georgia. The family, Mrs. Lydia Pearl Toots Wilson of Vienna, Georgia. The family, Mrs. Elisa Bernadette Telfair Williams of Cordele, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family, Mr. Charlie Lee Shine Jr. of Ashburn, Georgia. The family, Mrs. Leslie Lewis Green of Cordele, Georgia. The family, Mr. Dalvin Newman of Warner Robins, Georgia. The family, Mr. Anthony Perry King Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to all of the sick and shut-in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad. Who listen to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker. The selection goes out to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker, to my mother-in-law, Mrs. Billy Ann Hall and family, to my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, and his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter of Vienna, Georgia, and their grandson, Noble. This section goes out to my sister, Ms. Patsy Jackson, and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. This selection goes out to my niece, Mrs. Vera Mathis, goes out to Mrs. Florine Mumphrey Manning, and the entire Manning and Mumphrey family. This selection goes out to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. Goes out to our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, pastor of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church and moderator of the Gum Creek Missionary Baptist Association, with his upcoming association event scheduled for October. This election goes out to Mr. Cleveland R. Lemon, the oldest staff member of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home and steward of the Bethel CME Church here in the city of Cordele, Georgia. To our beloved Ms. Easter May Sanders and family, goes out to my neighbor, Mrs. Theron Jones and family, the entire Jones and Talbot family, Deacon and Mrs. John Stubbs and family, Deacon Donald Talbot and family, and Mrs. Juanita Mathis Talbot again, who celebrated her birthday. Happy birthday to Mrs. Juanita Mathis Talbot. This selection goes out to our dear friend, the Reverend Johnny Dean, and the members of the New Poplar Spring Baptist Church of Ironville, Georgia. Our brother, the Deacon Jimmy Charles Montfred, and Sister Carol Montfred, chairman of the Board of Deacons of the Crossroad Baptist Church, goes out to their pastor, the Reverend and Mrs. Nelson Maynard, and family, his beloved mother, Mother May Maynard, and the End Time Maynard and Harvest family. Goes out to Mr. Charlie, Mrs. Watine Jackson and family, Mr. Ernie and Miss Lisa Bryan and family, Mrs. Lavinia James and family, Mrs. Betty Crane and family, Pioneers Georgia, Miss Lily Crane and family, Miss Shanta K. Bowens and family, Mrs. Patsy Carter and family, Vienna, Georgia, Deacon and Mrs. Zachary Taylor, Zachary Fields and family, Mr. Tommy and Mrs. Gradine Ford and family, Mrs. Lucille Harris and family, Mrs. Mary Frances Davis and family, Mr. Joseph Glenn and family, Miss Nettie Whitis and family, Miss Burl Patrick and family, Miss Corrine Passmore and family, Mrs. Gail Chanel Williams and family, Mrs. Dorothy Rose Jones and family, Mr. Frederick Hardeman and family, Mr. Lenny Walker and family, Miss Annette Stembridge and family, Mrs. Eddie Mae Cooks and family, Mother Jessie Kate Harmon and family, Mr. Donald and Mrs. Ruby Daniels and family, Minister Gardner and Miss Beulah Morgan and family, Miss Maggie Harmon and family, Miss Pearl Reed and family, Mrs. Fanny Bivens and family, Miss Mary Applin and family, Deacon Earl Leary and family, Miss Patricia Leary and family, Mr. Eddie Leary, and again to their mother, Mrs. William A. Leary and family. Our first selection, our final selection goes out to Chairman Deacon Roger Westbrook and the entire Westbrook family. Mrs. Carolyn Jackson Hicks and family, Mrs. Ann Ross and family, Mrs. Letha Brown and family, Miss Bernell Welburn and family. Our final selection for this morning to our dear friend Mrs. Cheryl Carr Kendrick and family of Americus, Georgia. Our final selection for this morning.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. In your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.